In the 1950s in Thailand, a group of monks was tasked with moving a giant statue of the Buddha into a new temple that had been built to house the Buddha. It had been living outside for quite some time before. And as they were moving this statue, they accidentally dropped it and it got a big crack in it. And so as one of the monks went over to examine the crack, examine the damage, he realized that there was a golden light emanating from the from inside. And they started peeling back the layers and found that this was not a clay or a stucco statue at all, but a solid golden statue of the Buddha. And so the story goes that several hundred years earlier, the Burmese army was on its way to attack the monastery. And the Burmese army was known for stealing valuables, especially gold, and melting it down. And so the monks wanted to disguise their prized Buddha. And so they covered it with stucco and put some beautiful glass on it so that it still looked important, but you couldn't tell just how valuable it was. Unfortunately, all of the monks at the time were killed, and so there was no one left who knew that original story. And my friends, that's exactly what happens to each one of us. We are born as beautiful, golden, divine beings. We have this internal essence that cannot be tainted. And yet we face threats. We face the fear of people and forces beyond our control coming to attack us. And so we cover ourselves with things like ego and personality and karma, different words for it. Before we know it, we're living our lives as still lovely looking stucco statues, but the essence that's within us is all too often disguised. The golden essence, the golden Buddha, is all too often disguised. Kriology is the process, is the practice of devoting ourselves to a way of life that makes it as easy as possible for the plaster to fall away, revealing again our divine essence. This is not something, as we talked about in I Make Space for What Matters, this is not something that we can force to happen because that is also work of the ego, but we can live our lives in such a way where by grace, that plaster, the personality, the ego, the karma can fall away, can become neutralized. So this tenet is I dance with the divine. I dance with the divine. And the first part of that is rediscovering the divinity within ourselves and with others. There was a French priest and scientist in the late 19th, early 20th century who had this wonderful quote of saying, "We are not physical beings having a spiritual experience, but we are spiritual beings having a physical experience." Just think about that for a minute. Doesn't that change everything? At least when I think about it, it broadens my perspective of time, of what we're even here for, how long we're here, the impact of what happens. We are not physical beings having a spiritual experience, but we are spiritual beings having a physical experience. So Goswami Kriyananda taught it using this metaphor. He taught about how our state of awareness can be symbolically compared to amorphous clay. Now don't get confused, because I know we were talking about clay with the Buddha and clay here, this separate metaphors. But clay in and of itself has no real form. But if you add water to it and you roll it, you can transmute clay into anything. It can become a cup, a plate, a pitcher. And once the clay is formed, it's given a name, for it has been born. It has been created into form. And Kriyananda taught that it's at that stage that humanity gets lost, because we only see the forms and we forget the essence. We forget the essence from which we have come. We forget the essence that is our divinity. And so he says all of the stages of yoga lead to where you can take an object, a formed object, such as a sugar holder. I love that he chose that as the object of choice. And you can put it into an astral machine. Again, this is a metaphor. And you can press a button and you can disintegrate the sugar holder back to this amorphous clay. You can now reshape the clay into anything you wish. Thus, the sugar holder can now become a vase. Similarly, God consciousness can be compared to taking any creation, collapsing it back into itself and projecting out from itself a new creation. Your own creation, your own karmic condition can be brought back into balance after collapsing it. And when this occurs, balance is attained, reattained, and sustained. You are then freed from human bondage, transcending humanness and attaining divinity. So that is a very Kriya Yoga way of speaking, a very kind of metaphysical way of describing this process of what happens, or of how we get back in touch with the golden essence, with the divine essence that is within ourselves and every other sentient being. Kriya Yoga or Kriology is often described as increasing one's cosmic consciousness. And I don't know about you, but for me, sometimes that sounds a little woo-woo, even for me. But if we think about that, if we break it down, all that really means is, so consciousness is an awareness, a presence to, an awakeness to the cosmos, the way things work, the way things really are, and learning to transcend the stuckness that so often happens. The human condition is to walk around with the divinity hidden, and only our form or the plaster as what interfaces with the world. And when we do that, we are living in, we are asleep to so many possibilities. We are asleep to so many gifts that are right in front of our noses. So that's the first part of I Dance with the Divine, is rediscovering this divinity. And the second part is the dance part. So I love this because dance implies this dynamic, ever-evolving, being in the moment, being present. If I am dancing with someone, then I have to be very attentive to, let's say that they are leading, how they're nudging me to go, and if we're gonna spin, and I have to be incredibly present to the ways that our bodies interact and interact with the music and the timing. Goswami Kriyananda said that his teacher said, hey, God is ever new, ever changing, ever great bliss. For were he not, he would surely become boring. And I assure you that God is not boring. Kriyananda also said later that God is not a he, but that's for another lesson. Said another way, how we approach God is how God is revealed to us, and we are ever changing. So the point here is that this divinity is not some cauterized set of laws, principles, ideals that are stuck in the past that we simply receive and memorize and apply to our lives today. That is not what we're talking about here with Kriology. Instead, we're talking about cultivating an alive, awake, present, dynamic, interactive relationship with the divine that will emerge and evolve and be fresh and new based upon whatever is going on, how we are evolving, how the moment is evolving, how the people around us, our contexts are evolving. And so often people confuse this. They see how they perceive that God or the divine operated in the past or performed in the past, and they say, oh, look, God did this amazing thing. Let's recreate it over here. My prior life, I was in church leadership, and all the time you'd see some big church underwent a new visioning process, and suddenly their engagement grew by 30%. And so now suddenly all of the other churches are wanting to implement the same outcome of church A's visioning process. The problem is that church A's visioning process was birthed from a dance with the divine. And when we just try to replicate that, it never bears as much fruit. There's a Christian mystical theologian, James Finley, who says that the fall, the ways that we become separated from God, is when we try to be God without God. So we have the divine essence within us, but the problem is when we try to act upon or manifest that without the divinity that is both within us, yes, but also much, much larger than us. So how do we train ourselves to be able to be attuned to what the divine is calling forth from us, what the divine is speaking into us, the gifts that the divine is offering us? Well, Kriology trains us in just that. The yoga, the meditation, there are all sorts of practices that help attune and strengthen how we can direct our energy, perceive what's going on, so that we are able to, in the moment, be awake, present to reality, and respond instead of merely just reacting out of rote habit of what we've done over and over and over again. My friends, we are so glad that you are here. We are so glad that the golden essence inside of you has drawn you here. And I assure you that if you stick with us, if you devote yourselves to these practices, that slowly but surely, well, who knows, maybe it'll be fast for you, but if you're like most humans, slowly but surely, the plaster shell that you have created to protect yourself and yet that mutes your divinity will slowly start to crumble and fall away, and you will become better and better and more attuned at the bliss that comes from knowing how to dance with the divine.